One rainy afternoon, Mafia boss Damien Ashcroft walked into a small flower shop to buy flowers for his father's grave. But the woman behind the counter wasn't a stranger. It was Evelyn, the love he'd lost 9 years earlier. Before they could recognize each other, an 8-year-old child ran out to greet him. As the child reached for the bouquet, a silver necklace slipped from his collar, the very necklace he'd given Evelyn before everything fell apart. Then Damien noticed the birthmark under the child's left ear, the inherited mark of the Ashcroft family. His heart stopped. Like and comment with the city you're viewing from so I know how far my story has progressed, and stay until the end because this is just the beginning. The rain came in sideways off the lake, driving hard against the windows of every storefront on Crestfield Avenue. It was the kind of rain that didn't care about umbrellas, the kind that soaked through a good coat in 30 seconds flat and turned the gutters into small rivers carrying cigarette wrappers and coffee cups toward drains that hadn't been cleaned since the previous administration. Damien Ashcroft walked through it without hurrying. He was 34 years old, and he moved through the world the way a man moves when he has stopped being afraid of what waits around corners. Not with arrogance exactly, but with the settled weight of someone who has already calculated every room he enters before he steps through the door. He wore a charcoal overcoat, no tie, collar open. The rain darkened his shoulders and ran in small streams off the line of his jaw. He didn't wipe his face. He let it fall. The flower shop sat between a dry cleaner and a locked-up insurance office, the kind of small business that persists in a neighborhood through sheer stubbornness. A green canvas awning, hand-lettered sign, buckets of cut flowers arranged outside under a shallow overhang that was doing almost nothing against the weather. A small bell above the door announced his arrival with a sound so ordinary it felt absurd. Damien stood just inside the threshold for a moment, water dripping off him onto the mat, and let his eyes adjust to the warm yellow light. The shop smelled like earth and cold water, and something green and alive. It smelled nothing like any room he had occupied in the last 9 years. He noticed that the way you notice a smell from a house you grew up in, suddenly, in the chest, before your mind catches up. He moved toward the refrigerated display along the left wall. White lilies. He needed white lilies. His father had been dead for 6 years, but the habit of the visit remained. The grave, the flowers, the 20 minutes of standing still in a place where no one needed anything from him. It was the only quiet he allowed himself. He was reaching for a bundled sleeve of stems when he heard the door open behind him and then felt it. Not heard, felt, a change in the air, the particular stillness of someone behind the counter becoming very still. He turned. The woman standing at the rear of the shop had her back to him. She was arranging something on a low shelf, and all he could see was dark hair pulled back loosely, the curve of a shoulder under a pale green apron. She hadn't spoken yet. The shop was small enough that the silence between them was immediately physical. Then she turned around. Damien Ashcroft, who had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and never once let his face change, felt every muscle in his body lock. Evelyn Brooks was 32 years old, and she had not changed in any of the ways that mattered. The same dark eyes, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners that made her look like she was always on the verge of figuring something out. A small scar at the left side of her chin she'd gotten falling off a bicycle at 13. She'd told him the story once, laughing at herself, in a kitchen that no longer existed in a life that felt like it had happened to someone else. She was thinner than he remembered. There were small lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her hands, resting on the edge of the counter, were the hands of someone who worked with them every day. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then a voice came from the back of the shop. High, clear, the voice of a child who has not yet learned to announce themselves before entering a room. "Mom, did the yellow ones come in yet? Because Mrs. Calloway said—" The girl stopped when she saw the customer. She was 8 years old, maybe 8.5, with dark hair cut bluntly at the jaw, and her mother's eyes. Except they weren't quite her mother's eyes because there was something else in them, something in the set of the brow above them, something in the particular stubborn forward angle of her chin. She was wearing a school sweatshirt and carrying a backpack by one strap, and she looked at Damien with the frank, unguarded appraisal that children use before they learn it makes adults uncomfortable. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Damien said. His voice came out level. He was grateful for that. Whatever was happening behind his sternum, the cold spreading thing, the sudden roaring absence of breath, none of it reached his face. The girl dropped her backpack against the counter and leaned forward to peer at the flowers in his hand. "Are those for someone?" "My father," he said. "Is he sick?" "He passed away." She considered this with the serious, unsentimental honesty of a child who hasn't yet built the social reflexes that would make her look away. "My grandma passed away too," she said. "Mom put sunflowers on her grave because she said white ones are sad." "Lily," Evelyn's voice, quiet, a single word, a mother's specific warning frequency. The girl, Lily, straightened, and as she did, she reached back to pull her backpack up over one shoulder, and the motion tugged at the collar of her sweatshirt, and the silver chain shifted and the locket swung free. It was small, oval. The chain was thin silver, slightly tarnished at the clasp. The surface had a faint etched pattern of interlocking vines that Damien could have traced from memory with his eyes shut, because he had spent 40 minutes in a jewelry shop on Whitmore Street, choosing it when he was 25 years old, standing under fluorescent light, while a patient jeweler brought out tray after tray until Damien found the one that felt exactly right for a woman who preferred small things, quiet things, things that meant something without announcing it. He had put that locket around Evelyn's neck himself. He had done it in her apartment, in October, in the last good month before everything came apart. The girl tucked it back under her sweatshirt without noticing his stillness. But he noticed something else then, because the motion had also shifted her hair, pushing it back behind her left ear, and below the ear, small, faint, the color of old tea against her skin, was a birthmark. An irregular shape, roughly triangular, sitting exactly where a birthmark of exactly that shape had sat on his father's neck, and on his grandfather's jaw, and on his own hip, the same mark recurring across 3 generations of Ashcroft men like a signature the bloodline kept signing. Damien looked at the girl for one more second. Then he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn's face had gone the color of chalk. Her hands, still on the counter, had stopped pretending to do anything. "Lily," she said again, the same quiet word, except this time it meant something different. It meant go. The girl picked up her backpack and disappeared through the curtained doorway at the back. The sound of her footsteps faded up a staircase. The shop was completely silent except for the rain. Damien set the lilies down on the counter. He kept his voice low and entirely even. "How much for these?" Evelyn stared at him. Her breathing was audible from 6 feet away. "Evelyn?" $18, she said. Her voice held. He gave her credit for that. He put a 20 on the counter and picked up the flowers and walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. He turned back once. She hadn't moved. "I'll need change," he said. It wasn't about the change. They both knew that. But it gave her hand something to do, and it kept him in the room for another 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, he watched her open the register and count out $2 and cross to him and hold out the bills without meeting his eyes. And he took the money, and their fingers did not touch, and he walked out into the rain. He stood on the sidewalk and let the rain come down on him. He stood there for almost a full minute. Then he walked to the black car idling at the curb, got in, and sat in the back seat with the lilies across his knees and said nothing. And the driver had worked for him long enough to know that saying nothing was the correct response. He was back the next morning, not in the car. On foot, no coat this time, despite the cold, a cup of coffee in one hand that he'd bought from a cart 2 blocks away and hadn't touched since. He stood across the street from the flower shop at 7:45 and watched the lights come on inside, and watched a small figure move past the upstairs window, and felt the particular sensation of a man who has spent 9 years constructing a careful interior architecture, discovering that the foundation was built on sand. He didn't go inside. He stayed across the street for 12 minutes and then walked back toward the parking garage on Linden where he'd left the car. His name was Damien Ashcroft, and he had inherited his father's organization at 26 after a violent transition that had cost the lives of 4 men and permanently reshaped the Northeastern Territory. He controlled distribution networks across 3 states, had relationships with law enforcement he had cultivated carefully and expensively over years, and was feared by the people who understood what fear of him actually meant. He had made decisions in the last 8 years that he did not discuss and would not revisit, and that lived in a part of him he kept locked because unlocking it served no purpose. He was not a man who was surprised. He had engineered his life specifically to eliminate surprise. He sat in the parked car and stared at the concrete wall of the garage and thought about a birthmark the shape of a bent triangle and a silver locket and dark eyes that were his daughter's eyes and also not his daughter's eyes. And he understood that everything he believed about the last 9 years was wrong. He pulled out his phone, put it down, picked it up again. He didn't call anyone in the organization. He thought about calling Marcus, his head of security, and then didn't because Marcus would make it an operation, and an operation meant records, and records meant exposure, and exposure was the thing he needed least right now. What he needed was information. What he needed was to understand. He did it himself. Over the next 3 days, he moved through Crestfield like a man with nowhere in particular to be. He learned Evelyn's routines. The shop opened at 8:30. Lily left for school at 7:50, walking 2 blocks to the corner where a carpool picked her up. Evelyn closed at 6, sometimes 6:30 if there was a delivery. There was a small apartment above the shop. They had been here for 4 years. He got this from a dry cleaner 2 doors down who had the comfortable loquaciousness of a man who enjoyed being asked about his neighborhood. Before that, no one seemed to know, as if the years before had simply not existed. He found this detail about the timeline, as if they had simply appeared one day, fully formed, with no history. On the 4th day, he went back inside the shop. Lily was not there. School hours. Evelyn was at the back counter working with wire and stems, and she heard the bell and looked up, and the color that left her face was the same color it had been 4 days ago. "I'm not here to cause problems," Damien said. "Okay." Her voice was not okay. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing." She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "There's nothing to talk about." "Evelyn." "Don't." The word came out sharp, with an edge he hadn't heard in her voice before. Or maybe it was always there and he hadn't been paying attention. "You don't get to walk in here and say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like you have the right to." He stood in the middle of the shop and looked at her. "She has the Ashcroft mark," he said. Evelyn's hand stopped moving. "Below her left ear," he said. "Same as my grandfather, same as my father, same as mine." A long silence. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." She set down the wire. She looked at him for a long time, and he watched something move through her face. Not quite fear, something older and more complicated than fear. The look of someone who has been bracing for an impact for so long that the moment of contact brings almost something like relief. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "Please. I'm asking you." "I'm not going anywhere." "Damien." Her voice broke on the 2 syllables. She caught it, pulled it back. "You don't understand what happened. You don't know any of it. And if you keep coming in here—" She stopped again, looked past him at the rain-streaked window. "You'll get her killed." He didn't move. "Then tell me what happened." She looked back at him, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had at 23. Not young, not innocent, but open, before the years of whatever had happened to her had taught her to keep the doors shut. "I can't," she said. "Not here. Not now." "Then when?" "I don't know." "I'll come back tomorrow." "Damien, I'll come back every day until you're ready to tell me." He said it without anger, without threat, which somehow made it worse, which somehow made it feel more permanent than a threat would have. "I'm not going away. I've been away for 9 years and I didn't choose that, and I need to understand why." She didn't answer. He walked out. He was 2 steps past the threshold when the door opened from the other direction and a man came in. Late 50s, weathered face, a gray jacket that had been washed too many times. He held the door open with one hand and looked at Damien without expression, and the look was the look of a man who had spent his career reading rooms, calculating exits, making the rapid assessment of threat that becomes automatic after enough years of a particular kind of work. The man glanced back into the shop, at Evelyn, still behind the counter, her face now completely unreadable, and then looked back at Damien. "You should go," the man said. Not unfriendly, not warm either. I was leaving, Damien said. Good. The man held the door wider. An invitation that was not an invitation. Keep doing that. Damien looked at him for a moment, at the way he stood, the way his jacket hung slightly wrong on the left side, the way his eyes moved, and then stepped past him onto the sidewalk. He walked to the corner without looking back, but he heard the man say quietly before the door swung shut, "He can't know. You understand that. The little girl must never learn who her real father is." Damien stopped walking. The rain fell. A taxi went past, throwing up spray. Down the block, a delivery truck double-parked, hazards flashing, the driver already jumping out with a hand truck. He stood at the corner for a long moment, his back to the flower shop, and he felt something move through him that was colder and more fundamental than anger. The particular sensation of understanding that a story you thought was over is not over, has never been over, has been running parallel to your life this entire time, and that the man standing in a flower shop doorway speaking in a low voice about a little girl is the center of something he doesn't yet see the shape of. He turned around. The door of the shop was closed. Through the window, dimly, he could see the man's gray jacket at the counter, Evelyn's dark hair bent toward him, the two of them speaking in the close, urgent way of people with a shared emergency. Damien reached into his coat, his phone. He took a photograph of the man through the window, partial profile, gray jacket, the set of his shoulders, and then turned back toward the parking garage, and this time he didn't stop walking. In the car, he stared at the photograph. He had a daughter. He had been kept from her deliberately by someone, for reasons that were being described to him as protective, but that smelled, in the way that 9 years of surviving in his particular world had trained him to recognize, like a structure built by someone who needed the separation more than anyone. He needed to know who that man was. He needed to know what the structure looked like. He needed to know how close the danger still was, and from which direction, and how much time he had before whatever kept his daughter safe stopped keeping her safe. He thought about the birthmark beneath Lily's ear and the locket at her throat, and her voice, high, clear, without apology, asking him if the flowers were for someone sick. He had a daughter, and she didn't know his name. He put the car in drive and pulled into traffic and began, for the first time in 9 years, to move towards something he had lost instead of away from it. He did not yet know what was waiting for him when he got there. He didn't know about Vincent Moretti, or the file that had been sitting in a lockbox in a federal building for 9 years with his daughter's name on the outside. He didn't know that the man in the gray jacket had once pulled Evelyn out of a burning car on a county road outside the city with a 2-month-old child strapped in the back seat, and that the fire had been set deliberately, and that the man responsible had never faced any consequence for it. He didn't know any of that yet. He just drove. But he pulled up his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't used in 2 years, a forensic investigator who owed him 3 favors and asked no questions. And he sent a single text with the photo attached. Find out who this is. Everything. Call me when you have something. Then he put the phone in his pocket and drove through the rain toward the cemetery on the east side of the city, where his father's grave waited with no flowers on it. He would be back tomorrow. He had said it, and he meant it. He would come back every day, stand in that shop, and breathe the smell of earth and cold water and something alive, and wait for Evelyn to tell him the truth. And if she didn't tell him the truth, he would find it another way. He had always been good at finding things people believed were buried. He parked at the cemetery gate and sat for a moment with his hand on the door. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment above a flower shop, a girl who carried his blood and wore his gift at her throat and had never heard his name was doing her homework, or watching television, or asking her mother about something in the uncomplicated voice of a child who believed her world was safe. He intended to make sure it stayed that way, even if the cost of that was everything else. The forensic investigator's name was Carla Reyes, and she called back in less than 18 hours. Damien was in his kitchen when the phone rang. Not the downtown apartment he used for meetings, but the smaller place on the north side, the one almost nobody knew about, with a view of a parking structure and a radiator that knocked at 3 in the morning. He'd been standing at the counter with a glass of water he hadn't drunk, staring at the photograph on his phone screen, the gray-jacketed man's partial profile, the particular way he carried his left shoulder slightly higher than his right. "Nathan Hale," Carla said, without greeting. Retired. 22 years with the U.S. Marshals Service. Last posting was the Witness Security Program. Resigned 9 years ago. No formal explanation in the public record. Left with a clean pension and no disciplinary history. Since then? Nothing. No current employment, no fixed address on any database I can access cleanly, which means he's either very careful or someone made him very hard to find, and I'm leaning toward both. Damien said nothing. He was involved in 3 high-profile relocation cases before he left, Carla continued. All sealed. I can't get names without touching systems I don't want to touch without a better reason. But the timing of his resignation matches something I did find, Bashar. An internal review that was opened and then closed without findings inside of 30 days, which is either nothing or the kind of nothing that means something was buried fast. What was the review about? Unauthorized relocation, placing a civilian asset outside of official program channels. A pause. Damien, if this guy pulled someone off the books, it means he was protecting them from something the program itself couldn't protect them from. Which means whatever threat existed was either inside the federal infrastructure or connected enough to it that official channels weren't safe. He put the glass down. The water was room temperature by now. That's everything? That's what I have in 18 hours. You want more? Give me a week. I don't have a week. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long time, long enough for the radiator to knock twice and for the light outside the window to shift from dark gray to pale gray. Nathan Hale, a retired marshal who had taken someone off the books, outside official channels, because the official channels had been compromised. 9 years ago. The same 9 years during which Damien had believed Evelyn was simply gone because she had chosen to be gone, because the life he led had finally become too much, because she had made a reasonable decision about her own survival, and he had forced himself to respect it, even when respecting it felt like removing something from his own chest. He had never tried to find her. That was what it came back to. He had told himself it was respect, that it was the only decent thing left he could do, but respect had been easier than the alternative, easier than knowing. He got dressed and drove to Crestfield. He didn't go to the shop. He parked on a side street with a clear sight line to the corner where the carpool picked up Lily in the mornings, and he waited. At 7:48, she came around the corner with her backpack and her blunt-cut dark hair and her mother's unsentimental eyes, and she stood at the corner reading something on a small device while she waited. And at 7:53, a silver sedan pulled up, and she climbed in without looking up from the screen, and the car drove away. He watched the car until it turned out of sight. Then he drove around the block and parked directly in front of the flower shop and went inside. Nathan Hale was already there. He was sitting on a stool behind the counter with a mug of coffee, and Evelyn was standing at the far end of the room with her arms crossed, and the particular quality of silence that met Damien when he pushed the door open was the silence of a conversation that had been happening for a while and was about him. Hale looked at him without surprise. Up close, he was rougher than the partial profile had suggested, a face that had been weathered by specific kinds of stress rather than time, with the flat, considered eyes of a man who had spent 2 decades making fast decisions about who in a room was the greatest danger. He was looking at Damien now with those eyes. "You're faster than I expected," Hale said. "I had good help." Damien let the door close behind him. He looked at Evelyn. She was looking at a fixed point on the floor. "Nathan Hale, witness security, left the program 9 years ago after an unauthorized relocation." He waited a beat. "Want to tell me whose relocation that was?" Hale set down the mug. He didn't look at Evelyn. "Close the door." "Door's closed." "Lock it." Damien reached back and turned the deadbolt. The small metallic sound was very loud in the room. "Sit down," Hale said. "I'm fine standing." Hale looked at him for a moment with the measuring quality of a man deciding how much a particular thing is going to cost, and then he exhaled through his nose and picked up the mug again. 9 years ago, you were in the middle of a succession conflict, after your father's death. You know the broad outline of what happened, the violence, the consolidation. What you probably don't know is what was happening parallel to that, at a lower level, to people connected to you who weren't in the organization. Evelyn wasn't connected to the organization. She was connected to you. Hale's voice was flat, informational. That was enough. There was a standing order inside Vincent Moretti's people for anyone with a personal relationship to you. Not informants, not assets, just people. People who could be used, or who simply knew too much by proximity. Evelyn's apartment was under surveillance for 6 weeks before she knew about it. Evelyn had not moved. Her arms were still crossed, and she was still looking at the floor, and she was very still in the way that people are still when they are holding themselves together through some act of continuous internal effort. I found out, Hale said, through my own channels, not official ones. I'd been watching Moretti's people because they had connections to a relocation case I was running, and when I started pulling threads on Evelyn, I realized what I was looking at: a target. A pregnant woman who had no idea she was a target, living in an apartment that had been photographed and mapped and handed to people whose job it was to remove problems. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Pregnant. Damien's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on Hale. She was 2 months along, Hale said. She hadn't told you yet. She was going to. She was waiting. She had a specific night planned. She'd bought something to mark the occasion. I don't know the details, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that I identified the threat on a Tuesday, and by Thursday I had her out of the city, off the books, no program documentation, nothing that could be accessed through official channels. Because the official channels were compromised. Because I didn't know how far the compromise went. Hale's voice didn't change. Moretti had people in 3 different federal agencies at that time. I knew of 2 for certain, suspected a third. I couldn't run a relocation through official channels without it landing on a desk that might be dirty. I made a call. You made a call, Damien repeated. Yes. You decided, by yourself, without telling me, that my child should grow up not knowing who her father was. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence, heavier. I decided, Hale said, that your child should grow up. Evelyn made a small sound, barely audible, somewhere between a breath and something else, and turned away toward the window. Damien stood very still. His hands were at his sides. He was aware of them, aware of the specific effort required to keep them there, relaxed, open. He had trained this response over many years, in rooms with much more immediate dangers than this one. You're telling me, he said quietly, that you kept a child from her father for 9 years to protect her. Yes. And it never occurred to you? It occurred to me every day. Hale's voice cracked for the first time, the faintest fracture. He caught it. You think I didn't run the calculation? You think I didn't understand what I was taking from both of you? I knew exactly what I was doing. I also knew what Vincent Moretti was capable of, and I knew that as long as his network was intact, anyone connected to Damien Ashcroft by blood was a liability that would eventually be collected. Moretti's network has been dismantled. Parts of it, not all of it. He's been rebuilding for 2 years. Hale looked at him steadily. Which is why you're showing up at this shop, in person, on foot, multiple times in the same week, is the most dangerous thing that has happened to this child since the night I carried her out of Chicago, wrapped in a blanket in the back of a government vehicle. The room was completely silent. Damien turned and looked at Evelyn. She had turned back from the window. Her eyes were wet, but her face was the face of a woman who has learned that crying changes nothing, and so has found a way to contain it rather than deny it. Evelyn, he said. Her name felt different in his mouth now, heavier. Why didn't you look for me? After. She looked at him for a long time before she answered. Nathan told me you were dead. The words arrived in the room without drama. She said them the way someone says a thing they have said so many times in their own head that the saying of it aloud is almost beside the point. He told me there was a fire, she said, at one of the locations during the succession conflict. He said you didn't make it out. He showed me a document. I don't know now if it was real or fabricated. I've never known for certain. But I was 7 months pregnant, in a city I'd never been to, completely alone, and a man I had reason to trust told me the father of my child was dead. Damien looked at Hale. I needed her to stop looking, Hale said. The words came out even, but there was something in them that cost him. If she believed you were dead, she wouldn't try to make contact. If she tried to make contact, any of Moretti's people watching your line would have found her. I falsified the document. It was the ugliest thing I've done in my life, and I'd do it again. You'd do it again, Damien said. If the alternative was what would have happened to her and that child, yes. Damien exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked at the ceiling, at the hanging bundles of dried flowers above the refrigerated cases, at the watermarks on the old plaster, and then back down at the two people in front of him who had, between them, restructured his entire life without his knowledge or consent. He wanted to be angry. He was angry. But the anger was fighting with something else, with the particular vertigo of understanding that the 9 years he had spent constructing a version of events where Evelyn had simply chosen to leave were not real, had never been real, and that underneath those 9 years was a different story entirely. A story where she had been running, where she had been alone, where she had raised a child in a borrowed city, believing the child's father was in the ground. He needs to know the rest, Evelyn said. She was talking to Hale. Her voice was steady. Hale's jaw moved. Nathan. Her voice held something that wasn't quite authority and wasn't quite pleading. He's already here. He's already found us. Whatever the calculation was, it's changed. He needs to know. A long pause. Then Hale reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set a folded piece of paper on the counter. He didn't unfold it. He just let it sit there. Vincent Moretti knows you're in the city, Hale said. He's known for about 10 days. I have a contact, someone I trust, former colleague, who flagged movement in Moretti's network shortly after you were seen in this neighborhood. Moretti's people are asking questions about the shop, about Evelyn. He paused. About the girl. The cold returned to Damien's chest, specific and locating, like a compass needle swinging north. He doesn't know yet, Hale said, about the connection. He suspects a weakness, not the specific nature of it. But he's close. He has people watching, and if you keep coming back here in broad daylight without a cover, he'll know. He'll know everything. Damien looked at the folded paper. What's that? Everything I have on his current network. Locations, associates, known assets. Hale's voice was careful. I've been compiling it for 2 years, waiting for the moment when it would matter more than my own interest in staying invisible. Why now? Hale looked at him. Because you walked into this shop, and she called me within 10 minutes, and I've spent the last 4 days trying to figure out a version of this where everyone stays safe, and I can't find one. You're here. You're not going away, and Moretti is moving. He pushed the paper across the counter. So now it's your problem. You're better equipped to solve it than I am. Damien picked up the paper. He didn't unfold it yet. He held it and looked at Evelyn. Does she know anything? He said. Lily, does she know anything about me? Evelyn shook her head, barely. What does she think? A pause. I told her your father, her father, died before she was born, that he was a good man who loved me. She stopped. I didn't know what else to say. He nodded once. He put the paper in his coat pocket. He looked at Hale. I need 24 hours, he said. Keep her close. Don't change the routine. Nothing that looks like a change in pattern. If Moretti's people are watching the block, a break in pattern reads as a warning. I know how this works, Hale said without heat. Then we understand each other. Damien turned toward the door. His hand found the deadbolt. I want your number. Not a relay, not a contact, yours. Hale gave it to him. Damien unlocked the door. Damien. He stopped. Evelyn's voice behind him. He turned. She was standing in the middle of the shop, not behind the counter, not at the window, in the open space between the refrigerator cases and the front door, in the yellow light, with her arms at her sides for the first time, not crossed, not braced. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who had been carrying something for 9 years and had just, in the last hour, put it down, and was now feeling the specific agony of the muscles that had been doing the carrying. I'm sorry, she said. I know it doesn't. Don't, he said, quietly, not unkindly. Not yet. There's too much to do first. She nodded. He could see her throat move as she swallowed. He went out. The bell above the door rang its small, ordinary sound. He sat in the car and unfolded the paper. Nathan Hale had been thorough. The paper was covered on both sides in a precise, practiced hand. Locations, names, dates, operational patterns. The kind of intelligence that takes years of patient, careful attention to build. Damien scanned it and felt his understanding of the current landscape shift and reassemble, the way a map changes when you add new topography. Vincent Moretti was 61 years old, and he had survived everything. He had survived the succession conflict 9 years ago by staying out of it. Not neutral, exactly, but positioned, watching, letting the violence run its course and moving into the space the violence left behind. He had been there when Damien's father ran the organization, a secondary figure, an architect of certain arrangements that were profitable and deniable and that no one looked at too closely. He had built something of his own in the years since, smaller but more specific, more insulated. He had people in logistics, in municipal contracts, in import infrastructure. He was patient in the way that a particular kind of dangerous person is patient, not because he lacked urgency, but because he had learned that the right moment, waited for carefully, yields more than any amount of force applied too early. He had been watching Damien for 2 years. The paper made that clear, not with any particular operational focus, just watching, the way you watch a variable that might become relevant. And then Damien had appeared on Crestfield Avenue 3 times in 1 week outside a flower shop. And now Moretti was asking questions. Damien folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. He started the car. He drove 3 blocks to a coffee shop he'd never been to, sat in a corner booth, ordered nothing, and spent 45 minutes thinking through every piece of what he knew. At the end of 45 minutes, he had the outline of a plan. It was not a safe plan. It had no version where the word safe applied cleanly to anyone in it. But it was a plan that moved towards something rather than away from something, which was the only kind of plan he had ever trusted. He went back to the North Side apartment and spent 4 hours on the phone, carefully, with people who owed him the kind of debts that don't show up in financial records. He didn't tell any of them the full picture. He gave each person one piece: surveillance at a specific address, financial records from a specific account, movement tracking on a specific vehicle. Separated, each request was invisible. Together, they began to form a picture of Vincent Moretti's current operation that was detailed enough to act on. He was at this work when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then something, instinct, the particular frequency of a threat he'd learned to recognize at a register below conscious thought, made him pick up. Silence for a moment on the other end. Then a voice he didn't recognize, male, unhurried. "You've been spending time in an interesting neighborhood," the voice said. Damien said nothing. "Nice little shop on Crestfield. Flowers, the kind of place you wouldn't expect a man like you to frequent." Still nothing. "Cute kid, too," the voice said. "Dark hair. Walks to the corner every morning at 7:50. Silver sedan picks her up." A pause. "You know what I like about kids that age? They're creatures of habit. Same corner, same time, every single day." Damien's hand on the phone was completely steady. His voice, when it came, was completely even. "You have 30 seconds to tell me who you are before I spend whatever it costs to find out." A short sound on the other end, almost a laugh. "Mr. Moretti just wants you to know he's paying attention. Nothing more than that. For now." The line went dead. Damien sat with the phone in his hand for 3 seconds. Then he was on his feet, coat already in hand, moving toward the door with the particular velocity of a man for whom thinking and moving have become the same action, because the voice had said the same corner, same time, every single day. And it was 6:47 in the morning, and Lily left for school at 7:50, and he had 63 minutes. He had 63 minutes, and he did not yet know if that was enough. And the cold thing in his chest had become something else now. Something that had weight and direction and would not be reasoned with, something that had her name. He drove with both hands on the wheel and ran 2 red lights and didn't think about either of them. The city at 6:50 in the morning was not empty, but it was thin. Delivery trucks, early commuters, a garbage crew working the block near the highway on-ramp, and he moved through it with the focused tunnel quality of a man who has reduced everything to a single coordinate. Crestfield Avenue. The corner 2 blocks from the shop. 7:50. He had 58 minutes, and he was 12 minutes away. He called Hale while he drove. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and Damien said, without inflection, Call me back in the next 5 minutes or I'm walking into your situation without knowing where you are. And hung up. He called back in 3. I got a call, Damien said. Moretti's people. They have her routine, the corner, the time, the car. A beat of silence that told him Hale had already understood the full weight of it. I'm 2 blocks from the shop, Hale said. I was already coming. You got a call too. No, I got a feeling. 30 years of this work, you learn what a feeling is worth. Get her inside, change the routine. I don't care if it reads as a pattern break now. That's no longer the priority. I'll be there in 10 minutes. And if they're already on the block, then I'll deal with it when I'm on the block. He hung up and pressed the accelerator and thought about the voice on the phone. Unhurried, almost conversational, the specific tone of a man who believes he is not the one in danger in a given situation. He had met men who spoke that way. He knew what it indicated. It indicated a man who had already positioned his pieces and was now simply announcing the opening move. He turned onto Crestfield at 7:03 and slowed immediately. There was a gray panel van parked on the near side of the street, 60 yards from the shop, engine running. Exhaust rose from the tailpipe in the cold morning air. The van had no markings, no company livery, nothing. 2 men visible in the front. He clocked them in his peripheral vision as he drove past without slowing, without looking directly. A third shape in the back, half visible through the partition window. They were positioned with a clear sightline to the shop entrance and to the corner where Lily caught her carpool. He drove past and around the block and parked on the parallel street and sat for exactly 30 seconds, running the geometry. 3 men in the van, probably more he couldn't see. The shop had a rear exit into an alley. He'd mapped it on his second visit, the habit of knowing exits before you need them. The alley ran north to the next cross street, where it opened onto a loading area behind a restaurant. He could move Evelyn and Lily out the back without breaking the front sightline. But if Moretti's people had done their homework, and the phone call suggested they had, the alley would also be watched. He got out of the car. He went in through the rear. The alley gate was unlocked. Another thing he had noted, another small failure of security that had bothered him since the first time he'd walked the perimeter. He moved along the alley wall with the particular economy of motion that 9 years of operating in contested spaces had built into his body below the level of conscious instruction, and he came to the back door of the shop and tried the handle. Locked. He knocked twice, paused, knocked once more. The door opened immediately. Hale. He'd given him just enough time to get here, and he'd gotten here. Inside, the back room of the shop was small and crowded. A work table covered in wire and foam and floral supplies, a utility sink, shelving along 2 walls, a narrow staircase leading up to the apartment. Evelyn was on the stairs halfway down, still in the clothes she'd slept in. An oversized shirt, leggings, no shoes. Her hair was loose, and she was holding her phone against her chest, and her face had the particular blank quality of a person whose fear has surpassed the capacity for expression. "Where's Lily?" Damien said. "Upstairs. She doesn't know. Keep it that way for now." He looked at Hale. "Back of the alley. Is it covered?" "1 man. I came past him on my way in. He didn't make me, or he decided I wasn't the priority. He's at the north end near the restaurant. Stationary." "How many total? Your estimate?" "Van on the front street. 3, maybe 4. 1 in the alley. Possibly a spotter on the roof of the building across from the front. I couldn't confirm. Minimum 5, possibly 7. Damien looked at the work table. His mind was running the numbers in the specific automatic way it ran numbers in situations like this, stripping away everything that wasn't relevant and reducing the problem to its load-bearing elements. 5 to 7 men, 2 exits covered, a child upstairs who didn't know her world was in the process of being restructured around her. "They're not here to move yet," he said. "The call was a message. They wanted me to know they had the information and they were positioned. That's not how you operate if you're planning an immediate action. That's how you operate if you're waiting for instructions or waiting for a specific trigger." "The trigger being what?" Hale said. "Me. Either my presence here confirms what they suspect, that Lily matters to me, or my absence today tells them I didn't take the bait and they escalate." He paused. "Either way, they're watching the clock. When the carpool doesn't show and Lily doesn't come to the corner, they'll start moving. Evelyn made a small sound on the stairs. Not a word. Just air. Go get her dressed, Damien said, not unkindly. Quietly. Normal morning, as far as she's concerned. And then what? Evelyn's voice was controlled with effort. And then you stay up there and you stay away from the windows, and you let me and Nathan handle the next 20 minutes. She looked at him for a moment, at this man she had not seen for 9 years, standing in her back room in the morning half dark, talking about the next 20 minutes in the specific calm tone of someone for whom this was not the worst situation he had ever navigated, and then she turned and went back up the stairs. Damien looked at Hale. You armed? Hale opened his jacket, shoulder holster, compact frame. Always. I need you on the rear exit. If the man at the alley end moves toward the building, you stop him before he gets to the door. I don't care how. And you? Front. Damien reached into his waistband and checked the weapon there, automatic, the gesture brief and practiced and entirely without drama. I'm going to give them what they came to see. Hale stared at him. You're going to walk out the front door. They're here because they want to confirm the connection between me and the child. If I walk out the front door alone right now and I get in my car and I leave, they follow me or they report my presence. But either way, the focus shifts from the shop to me. It buys time. It also confirms the connection. They already know. He looked at Hale steadily. That call told me they know enough to act on it. What they don't know yet is exactly what she is to me, whether she's leverage or a liability. If I walk out like a man with nothing to protect, it blurs the picture. Hale's jaw worked. And if they don't follow you, if they stay on the shop, then I come back and we have a different conversation. He moved toward the door to the front of the shop. 30 seconds after I go out the front, call me. I need to know if anyone in that van reacts. He went through into the front of the shop without waiting for an answer. The space was dim, only the refrigerator cases lit from within, casting their cold glow across the floor. He unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the sidewalk and did not hesitate, did not look at the van, did not change his pace. He walked to the corner, turned, walked the half block to where he'd parked on the parallel street, and got in. His phone rang. Hale. Van moved, Hale said. Following you. One of them got out and is walking, staying on foot on Crestfield. The alley man hasn't moved. So they split. 2 on me, 1 holding position on the shop, 1 in the alley. That's what I see. Call me if anything changes. He hung up. He drove. He let the van follow him without making it obvious that he knew it was there, which required a specific kind of deliberateness. Not too fast, not too slow, taking routes that felt organic rather than evasive. He led them east toward the river, away from the shop, away from Crestfield, buying time in miles. He called Marcus while he drove. Marcus was the one member of his organization he fully trusted. Not because Marcus was without ambiguity, but because Marcus had been with Damien's father before Damien and had calculated, with the cold practicality of a man who respects continuity, that his interests and Damien's were inseparable. I need eyes on a van, Damien said, and gave the plate number he'd memorized in the alley, the partial he'd caught in his peripheral vision. And I need 2 people at a location on Crestfield without being visible. Clean. People who can wait. Marcus said nothing for a moment, then, You've been running something without the organization. I'm running something now. That's not Marcus. His voice was quiet. I need what I asked for. Another pause. Plate in 20 minutes. Bodies on Crestfield in 40. He drove for another 10 minutes, then stopped at a parking garage downtown and went to the 3rd level and sat in the car with the engine off. He waited. The van did not follow him into the garage. It would have been too obvious in the confined space. And he felt rather than saw it settle somewhere on the street below, idling. His phone buzzed. Not a call. A text from a number he recognized as one of the burner relays he used for messages that needed no reply trail. Seen you looking. Time to talk. Come to the Westfield site tonight, 10 p.m. Come alone. V.M. Vincent Moretti. Damien read it twice. Set the phone on the passenger seat, picked it up and read it again. The Westfield site was a former industrial property on the south waterfront that had been in a state of partial demolition for 3 years, a legitimate development project that had stalled in permitting, which made it ideal for everything a man like Moretti used space like that for. Damien knew it. He had done business near it, not in it. Come alone. The invitation with the blade inside it, the oldest construction in this kind of negotiation. He thought about what Hale had said. Moretti rebuilding for 2 years, patient. Moretti watching Damien without a specific operational focus, just watching, a variable being tracked. And then the variable had appeared on Crestfield Avenue 3 times in a week, and Moretti had moved, and the move was specific and calibrated. Not a kidnapping, not violence, just a demonstration of positioning, followed by an invitation. Which meant Moretti wanted something. Not Lily as a target, not yet. As leverage. He wanted to sit across a table from Damien and put something on it and watch what Damien did. He texted back a single character, why. Then he called Hale. Van situation. Stabilized, Hale said. Your man Marcus is efficient. The foot watcher on Crestfield has been removed from the equation. Quietly, no incident. Van has pulled back to a holding position 4 blocks east. Your people are on the street. Good. Keep Lily out of school today. Illness, whatever Evelyn tells the carpool. I don't want a routine for anyone to track. Evelyn won't like that. Evelyn will understand it. What are you doing tonight? He looked at Moretti's text on the screen. Meeting an old problem. A pause. Alone. That's what was requested. Damien. Hale's voice was careful. I've seen what Moretti does with alone. So have I. He started the car. That's why I'm going. He spent the rest of the morning working, not on Moretti, but on the financial infrastructure that Nathan Hale's paper had sketched, and that he now needed to understand in detail. Moretti's money moved through 4 layers of legitimate business before it became clean. 2 of those businesses had connections to city contracts, which meant there was a paper trail that, properly assembled, would be of considerable interest to investigators who had been trying to build a case on Moretti for years and kept finding the evidence curiously absent. He knew a name. A federal investigator, a woman named Diane Cho, who had run 2 previous Moretti inquiries and been stalled each time by missing documentation and uncooperative witnesses. He had never spoken to her. He had avoided her the way anyone in his position avoided anyone with a federal badge on principle, as a matter of operational hygiene. He made an appointment through an intermediary for the following morning. At 4 in the afternoon, he drove back to Crestfield. Evelyn opened the back door before he knocked. She'd changed and had her hair pulled back, and her hands smelled like the floral solution she used to condition stems, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who has had 6 hours to process the morning and has come to some conclusions. Is she okay? He said. She thinks she has a cold. She's upstairs reading. Evelyn stepped back to let him in. She asked about you. He stopped. What? She doesn't know who you are. You came in twice this week. She noticed. Evelyn's voice was careful. She asked if the man who bought flowers for his father was coming back. He stood in the back room and said nothing. What do I tell her? Evelyn said. Not accusing. Asking genuinely, the way a person asks when they have run out of the answers they have been using and need new ones. Nothing yet, he said. Soon, but not yet. She nodded. She moved to the utility sink and ran water over her hands, not because they needed washing, just to have something to do. He watched her and recognized the gesture, the need to be in motion when everything feels like it is on the verge of going still in the wrong way. I'm meeting Moretti tonight, he said. The water stopped. He made contact, Damien said. He wants a conversation, which means he's not ready to move directly. He wants to establish what I'll give him before he decides how to proceed. And you're going to go. Not a question. I'm going to go. She turned off the tap, turned around, looked at him with the dark eyes that their daughter had inherited. And if it's a trap, then I'll deal with a trap. Damien! The word came out with a weight that suggested everything underneath it. 9 years of weight, the specific exhaustion of a woman who has been afraid for a very long time and has just, in the last 48 hours, had the thing she feared most materialize in front of her. If something happens to you tonight, nothing is going to happen to me tonight. You can't know that. I know Moretti. I know how he thinks. He wants leverage, not a body. A body creates problems. Leverage creates options. He's going to try to find out what Lily is worth to me. He looked at her steadily. Which means I need to go in there looking like a man who has a daughter he just found out about and isn't sure what to do with. She stared at him. Is that true? The question hung between them, and he understood what she was really asking. Not about tactics, not about what he would say to Moretti, but something more fundamental, something that had been sitting in the room between them since he first turned around in this shop and saw her face. No, he said. It's not true. Something moved in her expression. Something that might have been relief, or its more complicated cousin. 8 hours, he said. I'll be back by morning. He left her in the back room and went out through the alley and didn't let himself look at the staircase on the way out. The Westfield site at 10 at night was exactly what it looked like in daylight, only darker. A gutted industrial building, partial walls, a roof that covered maybe 60% of the floor space, the remainder open to the sky where the demolition crew had taken sections apart from above. Generator-powered work lights had been set up along the interior, casting hard shadows and pools of yellow light that made the space look staged, which it was. Moretti was already there. He was standing near the center of the lit area, and he was not alone. 2 men visible behind him, one to each side and back, the specific positioning of people who are there to watch rather than to act unless instructed. He was 61, and he looked it, but he looked it the way a piece of machinery looks its age. Worn in the right places, functional in all the ones that mattered. He had a square face, heavy through the jaw, and the particular quality of stillness in his eyes that Damien associated with men who had learned that patience is the most dangerous weapon in any room. Damien, he said, expansive, almost warm. Vincent. I was starting to think you wouldn't come. Here I am. Moretti looked him over with the slow, assessing quality of a man who has been reading other men his entire professional life and trusts the reading. You've been busy this week. Interesting neighborhood for a man of your usual habits. I go where I need to go. Yes. Moretti turned slightly, moved a few steps to his left, looking at the exposed structure of the building above. A man comfortable in demolished spaces, in places that were between what they had been and what they would be. The florist, pretty woman, difficult life, it looks like, was small business, single mother, moved around a lot before she settled in Crestfield. He paused. The girl looks like you. Damien stood very still. Around the eyes, Moretti said conversationally. The jaw. And there's something else. I had someone pull a photograph, older, your father when he was young. The resemblance is there. He turned back and looked at Damien with the unhurried expression of a man holding all the relevant cards and in no rush to play them. How long have you known? Recent, Damien said. And the mother, she kept it from you. Circumstances kept it from me. Moretti made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Acknowledgement. Circumstances. He moved closer, stopped at a distance that was intimate without being threatening, the distance of a conversation between men who respect each other's capacity for violence sufficiently to keep it theoretical. Here's what I want you to understand, Damien. I don't want to hurt a child. I want you to hear that clearly, because it's true, and because what comes next makes more sense if you believe it. Damien waited. I want what was mine, Moretti said. The warmth left his voice, not replaced by anger, replaced by something flatter, more permanent. The Eastern Corridor, the port arrangements, the distribution chain that your father built and that you've been managing in a way I find... A pause. Suboptimal. Those arrangements aren't yours. They were before your father and I had our disagreement. His eyes held steady. I'm proposing a correction, a restructuring. You step back from the Eastern Corridor and certain other conversations that might be of interest to federal investigators about your operation, conversations I have been sitting on patiently for some years, remain private. Damien said nothing. The girl is irrelevant to this, Moretti said, as long as we understand each other. If we don't understand each other, he spread his hands, a small gesture, almost regretful. Then she becomes relevant. The work lights hummed. Somewhere in the building, a piece of loose metal shifted in the wind off the waterfront, a low scrape against concrete. Damien looked at Moretti and understood three things simultaneously. That Moretti believed this was a negotiation he had already won. That the federal documentation Moretti claimed to hold was real and would be damaging, and that there was no version of this conversation in which agreeing to Moretti's terms actually removed the threat to Lily. Because a man who had used a child as a negotiating point once would use her again whenever the terms required adjustment. He also understood something else. Something that arrived not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a rearrangement of weight in his chest, a thing settling into its correct position after a long time of being in the wrong one. He was not going to give Moretti the Eastern Corridor. He was not going to restructure anything. He was not going to negotiate or reason or find a workable middle ground. He was going to dismantle everything Moretti had built, including the documentation, including the network, including the patient-careful infrastructure of the last 2 years. And he was going to do it by handing every piece of it to Diane Cho and her federal investigation, including every piece of his own operation that got caught in the net, because a clean life for his daughter was worth more than a criminal empire. And because the man standing in front of him with his hand spread in that small, regretful gesture had tried to have Evelyn killed 9 years ago on a county road with a 2-month-old in the back seat and had never faced a single consequence for it. "I need 72 hours, Damien said, to look at the Eastern Corridor situation. I'm not in a position to make a commitment tonight." Moretti studied him, the flat eyes moving over his face with the careful attention of a man checking for tells. 72 hours? I need to understand the full scope of what you're describing." A long pause. Then Moretti nodded, once, slowly. 72 hours. He turned away, back toward his 2 men. Conversation concluded. "I'll expect your answer Thursday, and Damien," he stopped without turning around. "If you're thinking about running, understand that the girl is already being watched. Any movement that looks like relocation, and I accelerate the timeline considerably." He walked into the dark interior of the building and was gone. Damien stood in the yellow light for a moment. Then he walked back out through the entrance of the Westfield site and into the cold waterfront air and got into the car and sat. He had 72 hours. He pulled out his phone and dialed Diane Cho's cell number. The one he'd been given through the intermediary, the one she used for contacts who couldn't call the office. And it rang twice before she picked up. "This is Cho. My name is Damien Ashcroft," he said. "I have documentation on Vincent Moretti's current network. I also have information about his prior activities going back 9 years, including an attempted homicide that was never reported." He paused. "I want to talk about a cooperation arrangement. Tonight, if possible." Silence on the other end. He could hear her breathing, the specific held quality of a person recalibrating very fast. "Mr. Ashcroft," she said carefully, "you understand that a conversation of this nature would have significant implications for your own." "I understand exactly what it means," he said. "That's why I'm calling tonight instead of waiting until I've had more time to talk myself out of it." Another pause. Then, "Where are you?" He told her. She said she'd be there in 40 minutes. He put the phone down and looked at the waterfront through the windshield, the lights reflecting off the black water, the distant shapes of cargo infrastructure, the city behind him going about its ordinary business in the dark. He thought about a flower shop on Crestfield Avenue, a woman standing at a utility sink running water over her hands, a girl upstairs who had asked if the man who bought flowers for his father was coming back. He thought about 72 hours and what 72 hours required of him, and what it would cost and what it would look like on the other side. He picked the phone back up and sent a single text to Hale. "Watch the shop tonight. Don't leave." Then he sat and waited for Diane Cho, while the waterfront lights moved on the dark water and the city continued its indifferent noise around him, and somewhere across it, a girl who didn't know his name was sleeping in a room above a flower shop, safe for now, safe for this hour, while her father sat in a parked car at the edge of everything he had built, and prepared to burn it all down to keep her that way. Diane Cho arrived in 38 minutes in an unmarked sedan, alone, which told him something about her. That she had calculated the risk of coming without backup and decided the potential value of the conversation outweighed it. She was 40, compact, with the specific alertness of someone who had been running on 4 hours of sleep for so long it had become her baseline. She got in the passenger seat without being invited. "Talk," she said. He talked. He gave her 40 minutes of it. Moretti's network, as Hale had documented it, the financial layering, the municipal contract connections, the port arrangements, the attempted homicide 9 years ago on a county road. He held back nothing except the details that would expose Lily directly. Cho listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she sat for a long moment looking at the windshield. "You understand," she said, "that I'll need your full cooperation. Your organization, your records, everything." "I understand. This ends your operation." "I know what it ends." She turned and looked at him with the careful, measuring eyes of a woman who has been lied to by better men than most. Whatever she saw, she made a decision. "Thursday," she said. 72 hours. Don't move the woman or the child. Any disruption of pattern confirms to Moretti that you've turned and he'll accelerate. She opened the door. "And Ashcroft." She paused with one foot out. "If you're playing both sides of this, I will dismantle you personally." "I know," he said. She got out and walked back to her car and drove away. He sat alone for another minute. Then he drove back across the city toward Crestfield, toward a shop that smelled like earth and cold water and something alive, toward a woman who had been running for 9 years, toward a daughter who didn't know his name yet. 72 hours. He had already decided what came after them. He would cooperate fully with Cho's investigation. He would hand over every record, every account, every name, the Eastern Corridor, the distribution network, the arrangements his father had built and he had maintained. All of it, surrendered, legally, permanently. In exchange, Cho would move on Moretti before Moretti could move on the shop, and the 9-year threat that had shaped every decision Evelyn and Hale had made would finally be excised at the root. It would cost him everything he had inherited. He found, sitting in the dark car on Crestfield Avenue, looking up at the lit window above the flower shop where a shadow moved, Evelyn, awake, waiting, that he did not particularly care. Some things, it turned out, were worth more than an empire. He got out of the car and walked to the back door and knocked twice, paused, knocked once, and waited for the sound of the lock turning. The 72 hours did not hold. It was 41 hours in when Hale called, and the quality of his voice in the first syllable told Damien everything before the words arrived. "They took her," Hale said. 20 minutes ago, school pickup. The carpool driver. Someone replaced him. We didn't catch the switch in time. Lily got in the car." Damien was at his North Side apartment. He had been sitting at the kitchen table with Cho's preliminary cooperation documents spread in front of him, working through the financial disclosure section with the specific concentration of a man who has decided on a course of action and is moving through its requirements without allowing himself to feel the full weight of what he is giving up. The documents were detailed and thorough, and they represented the legal disassembly of everything his father had built, and he had maintained, and he had been signing his way through them with a pen that felt heavier with each page. He put the pen down. "Which direction?" he said. "South, toward the waterfront. I had a partial on the vehicle." Hale gave him a plate number, a make, a color. He was already moving. Coat off the chair, weapon checked in the same motion, keys, phone, out the door before Hale had finished the sentence. "Evelyn," he said, "with me. She's—" A sound in the background, something between a word and something that wasn't a word. "She's not good. Keep her with you. Don't let her move independently. She'll go straight toward wherever she thinks Lily is, and that's what Moretti wants." He was in the stairwell now, feet hitting the steps in a rhythm that matched the thing happening in his chest. Not panic, something colder and more focused than panic. The place beyond panic where everything becomes very clear and very simple. "I'm calling Cho. Cho can't move fast enough. I'm calling Cho and Marcus. You stay with Evelyn. That's your job right now, Nathan. The only job. You keep her from doing something that gets Lily hurt. Can you do that?" A pause that cost him. Then, "Yes." He hung up and dialed Cho while he hit the ground floor door and came out into the cold morning air at a run. Cho picked up on the first ring. "Ashcroft. He moved early. He has my daughter." He was at the car now, door open. Waterfront, South End, probably Westfield or one of the adjacent properties. That accelerates our timeline considerably. It eliminates our timeline. I need whatever you can move right now, not in an hour, not after a briefing, right now. A beat. He heard her already moving. Background sounds. A door. Her voice directed at someone else giving clipped instructions. I have a tactical unit I can redirect. 20 minutes. I'll be there in 15. Ashcroft, do not go in before... He put the phone on the seat and drove. The waterfront in the early afternoon had the specific desolation of industrial space that has never been meant for human comfort. Flat gray light off the water, chain link and concrete. The distant mechanical sound of port equipment operating somewhere to the east. He drove past the Westfield side entrance once without stopping and clocked what was visible. 2 vehicles outside the fence line, a man at the gate who was not a construction worker, a second man visible through the fence near the building's main entrance. Minimum 2 outside. Unknown number inside. He parked 4 blocks north and came around on foot through a gap in the fence he'd identified on his first visit 2 nights ago. A section where the chain link had been cut and pushed back and held in place with wire ties rather than properly repaired. The kind of temporary fix that accumulates on a stalled construction site over 3 years of nobody's priority. He moved along the interior fence line, staying in the shadow of a partial wall, and came to a position where he could see through a ground-level opening into the building's interior. They had set up in the same area where Moretti had received him 2 nights ago. The lit section, the generator lights, the hard shadows. But the configuration was different now. There were more of them, 6 that he could immediately count, and in the center of the lit space, sitting on a folding chair with her backpack still on her back, was Lily. She was not visibly hurt. She was sitting straight, backpack straps on both shoulders the way a child sits when she is trying to make herself feel like things are normal. And she was looking at the men around her with the specific expression her mother had when she was containing something. Not fear, or not only fear, but the active effort of a person deciding how to be in a situation they do not yet fully understand. 8 years old, and she was holding herself together better than most grown men he had put in difficult rooms. He felt something move through him that had no name he was willing to assign to it. He kept moving. He needed to know where Moretti was. He couldn't see him in the lit section. He moved along the wall, deeper into the building's shadow, toward a secondary entrance on the east side. His phone vibrated. Marcus. He pressed it to his ear without speaking. I have 3 people outside the fence on the south end, Marcus said, low, waiting for your word. Wait for my word. Nobody moves until I have eyes on the child, and I know where Moretti is. Understood. He ended the call and kept moving and came through the east entrance and stopped. Moretti was in the rear section of the building, the unlit part, standing near a folding table with a phone to his ear, his back partially to Damien, speaking quietly. 1 man with him, close, bodyguard positioning, right side. Damien had 2 options, and about 4 seconds to choose between them. He could wait for Cho's unit, hold position, let the federal response do what federal responses do, which was arrive with force and procedure and the weight of legal authority behind them. Clean, safe, relatively, the right way. Or he could move now with what he had, because Lily was sitting in a folding chair with her backpack on, and she had the look of a child maintaining composure by a thread. And every minute she sat in that chair in that lit space, surrounded by those men, was a minute that could break in the wrong direction. He moved. He came through the shadow fast and low, and the bodyguard heard him at the last possible moment and turned, and Damien hit him once, hard, in the throat. Not a killing blow, a disabling one. The specific strike that removes a man's capacity for volume and coordinated movement without removing his capacity for regret. And the man went down sideways against the folding table and took it with him. Moretti turned. He was fast for 61. His hand was inside his jacket before Damien had fully closed the distance, and Damien caught the wrist and turned it, and there was a brief, violent negotiation of leverage and balance that lasted approximately 3 seconds and ended with Moretti against the wall, Damien's forearm across his chest, the weapon on the floor between them. Moretti looked at him without the warmth this time, without the patience. What was underneath those, it turned out, was something simpler and harder. You called Cho, Moretti said. Not a question. His voice was slightly compressed by the forearm across his sternum. You actually called her. 2 days ago. Something moved through Moretti's face. Recalculation. The rapid, unwilling reassembly of a position. Then you're done. Everything you have is already documented and in federal custody. Damien looked at him. His forearm didn't move. The Eastern Corridor, the port arrangements, your financial layering, all 4 levels of it. My operation and yours, everything that connects them, everything that doesn't, it's done. Moretti stared at him. You burned your own house down. Yes. For a child you've known about for a week. He didn't answer that. It didn't require an answer. Let me go, Moretti said. His voice had changed, not soft, not frightened, just recalibrating to the new terrain. Let me walk out of here and this doesn't have to... Cho's unit is 12 minutes out. Damien stepped back, picked up the weapon from the floor, removed the magazine and cleared the chamber and put the components in his coat pocket. You're not walking anywhere. From the lit section came a sound. Voices. Sudden movement. The particular commotion of a situation changing faster than it was supposed to. Damien turned and went through the interior toward the sound and came into the lit section and found the cause. 2 of Moretti's men were on the ground, and Marcus's people were inside the building, and in the folding chair Lily was standing now, backpack still on, her eyes moving rapidly across the space, taking inventory the way her father took inventory, cataloging exits and threats and the position of every person in the room. She saw him. She did not know who he was. She had seen him twice in a flower shop buying lilies for a grave. But she looked at him the way she had looked at him the first time, with the frank, direct assessment of a child who has not yet learned that it makes people uncomfortable. And then she looked at the men on the ground and back at him, and she said, in a voice that was remarkably steady for an 8-year-old who had been sitting alone in an industrial building for 40 minutes surrounded by strangers, "Are you here to take me to my mom?" "Yes," he said. She crossed the space between them without running, walking, the deliberate walk of a person who has decided that running would mean admitting to the fear she has been managing this whole time. And when she reached him, she did not take his hand, but she stood close enough that their arms were touching, and he felt the warmth of her through his coat sleeve, and he put his hand on her shoulder, and she allowed it. "There are more of them outside," she said quietly. "I heard them talking. The gate and the south fence." "I know," he said. "Marcus." He raised his voice just enough. "South fence. 2 men. Handle it." Marcus moved. 2 of his people went with him. Damien stayed where he was, with his hand on Lily's shoulder, and he felt her breathing. Fast, shallower than normal, the controlled breathing of someone who has been afraid and is now managing the transition out of it. And he regulated his own breathing deliberately, the way you do when you are close enough to a frightened animal that it can feel your body, because calm is transmissible if you mean it. From the back section of the building came a sound. Movement. Moretti's bodyguard, recovered enough to be ambulatory, and behind him, Moretti himself, moving toward the east exit. "He's running," one of Marcus's men said. "Let him go," Damien said. "Damien!" Cho's unit is 8 minutes out. Every exit on this property is about to be covered by federal agents with arrest authority. He looked at the east entrance through which Moretti had disappeared. "He has nowhere to go that I haven't already accounted for." He looked down at Lily. She was looking up at him with the measuring expression that he recognized because he wore it himself, had worn it all his life. The expression of someone assembling information and waiting until they have enough before they speak. "You came to the shop twice," she said. 3 times. "You bought lilies?" "Yes." "For your dad?" "Yes." She looked at him for a moment, something working in her face, something that was not quite the question she was building toward, more like the thing underneath the question, the thing that had been there since the first time he walked through the door. "Do you know my mom from before?" He heard sirens, distant, approaching from the north. Cho's unit. 8 minutes had become 6. "Yes," he said. "From a long time ago." She absorbed this. Outside, the sound of Marcus's people handling the south fence. Brief, contained, efficient. The generator lights hummed. The cold waterfront air moved through the building's open sections, carrying the smell of salt water and rust and something industrial. "Is that why you kept coming back?" she said. "Because of her." He looked at his daughter, at the birthmark below her left ear, at the locket that sat under her sweatshirt against her skin, at the angle of her jaw and the specific set of her brow, and all the accumulated evidence of a fact that he had known for 10 days and that she did not yet know, and that was going to change everything in her life the moment it was spoken. "Yes," he said, because it was true, and because she deserved true things, and because whatever else he was, and whatever else the next days and weeks were going to require of him, he intended to begin with true things where she was concerned and never stop. The sirens grew louder. Through the fence line, the first flash of vehicle lights. From the east side of the building, suddenly, a shout. One of Marcus's men, urgent. Then running footsteps. Then a second voice, Moretti's, at a different register than any Damien had heard from him before. Not the controlled warmth, not the flat patience, something rawer and less managed. The voice of a man whose calculated positions have all collapsed at once and who is now operating on something older and less disciplined. And then a third sound, preceding everything else, arriving before Damien had fully processed the others. A single sharp crack from the east end of the building, and the generator lights went out simultaneously, all of them, plunging the interior into a darkness broken only by the approaching sweep of federal vehicle lights through the fence line. And in that sudden dark, Damien pulled Lily against him and dropped to one knee on the concrete floor with his body between her and the direction the sound had come from, and he heard her sharp intake of breath. Not a scream, not a cry, just breath, the instinctive gasp of a child whose world has just gone dark. And he said, low and close to her ear, "I've got you," and felt her hands grip his coat. The lights from Cho's vehicles cut through the fence and swept across the interior, and in their moving illumination, he saw Marcus's man down on the east side, not dead, moving, hand pressed to his arm. He saw two of Moretti's remaining loyalists at the far wall, weapons raised, the specific frozen tableau of men who have just heard federal sirens and are now running their own calculations about what comes next. And he saw Moretti. Moretti was at the east entrance, not through it, stopped, turned back, and in the sweeping federal lights his face was visible for 1 second. Not the face of a man running, but the face of a man who has decided that if he is going down, he will determine the terms. His eyes found Damien in the dark, found him exactly, the way a predator finds the specific target it has been tracking across 9 years of patient, careful waiting, and his arm came up, and in the half-second before everything moved at once, Damien looked at the line of that arm and understood with total clarity that Moretti was not aiming at him. He was aiming at the child pressed against Damien's chest, because Moretti had understood what Damien had understood the moment Lily walked across the concrete floor without running, that the child was the only leverage left, and a living child was leverage, but a child who was no longer living was something else entirely, was a message, was a last act of control, was the final thing a man could take from an enemy who had just handed his empire to a federal investigator and rendered every other form of power obsolete. Damien moved. He was already in motion before the thought completed. Not away from the line of fire, toward it, because Lily was behind him, and there was no way that kept her safe. Only forward, only the space between the weapon and its target, and he crossed that space in 3 steps and hit Moretti's gun arm upward as the weapon discharged into the ceiling, plaster dust falling in the sweep of the headlights. And then they were on the ground together, both of them, and the weapon was somewhere else. And Damien had Moretti's wrist, and Moretti had Damien's collar, and they were close enough that he could hear the man breathing. Ragged, furious, the breathing of a man whose careful architecture has finally given way and who is now operating on nothing but the oldest and most honest part of himself. "It's over," Damien said, right in his face, plaster dust in his mouth. "It's over, Vincent." Moretti strained against him. 61 years old, and there was still something in him that didn't want to stop. "You don't—" His voice broke. "You gave away everything. My father is dead." Damien's grip tightened on the wrist. "And you tried to kill his grandchild, so we're done talking about my father." The federal team came through the fence. They came in fast and with light, and with the specific organized authority of people who have been given a precise target and the legal architecture to act on it. And within 90 seconds, the interior of the building was lit by their equipment, and Moretti's remaining men were on the ground, and Moretti himself was being pulled upright by two agents, while a third read into his ear the words that marked the formal end of 9 years of running and hiding and surviving and building. And the beginning of something Damien did not yet have a full picture of, but could feel, in the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives, was going to be different from everything that came before it. Diane Cho came through the east entrance last. She looked at Moretti in federal custody, at Marcus's man being attended to, at the plaster dust still settling, at Damien standing in the middle of it all with his coat covered in concrete grit. Then she looked past him. He turned. Lily was standing exactly where he had left her, 5 feet back, backpack still on both shoulders, watching the federal team work with the same frank, cataloging attention she had given everything else tonight. She had not moved. She had stayed exactly where he had put her. She looked at him and said completely evenly, "You got shot at." "I'm fine." "Your face is bleeding." He reached up, plaster from the ceiling discharge. He wiped it away. "Is that man going to jail?" she said, indicating Moretti, being walked toward the entrance by 2 agents. "Yes," Damien said. She considered this, looked at Cho, looked back at Damien. "Are you—" The question arrived with the simplicity of a child who has not yet learned to soften the things she actually wants to know. And it landed in the room with a weight that had nothing to do with her 8 years and everything to do with the bloodline she carried and the particular quality of mind she had inherited from 2 people who had both, in their different ways, learned to ask the questions that mattered directly and without apology. He stood in the lit wreckage of the Westfield site, with federal agents moving around him and Moretti in custody, and his entire operation formally surrendered to the woman standing 10 feet away with a warrant and 9 years of patient investigative work behind her. And he looked at his daughter and opened his mouth to answer, and his phone rang. "Evelyn." He answered immediately. "She's safe," he said. "She's with me. She's not hurt." The sound on the other end was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they have been holding against their chest for 40 minutes finally releases. And it was the most human sound he had heard in a very long time, and he stood with the phone pressed to his ear and let it exist without trying to answer it, because some things don't need answering. Lily was looking at him. She had heard her mother's voice through the phone. Her expression had changed, the careful composure coming down, the 8-year-old returning, the particular relief of a child who has been very brave for a long time and can now, because her mother's voice exists in the same space as her father's face, finally stop. "Can I talk to her?" Lily said. He held out the phone. She took it with both hands and held it against her ear and said, "Mom, I'm okay. I didn't cry. I figured if I just—" and then stopped, because Evelyn was saying something, and Lily's face did the thing faces do when the last held thing lets go, and she turned slightly away from him with the phone still at her ear, and Damien looked at the ceiling of the Westfield site, at the hole in it where a bullet had gone through on its way to nowhere, and he breathed. Cho appeared at his shoulder. "Moretti's in custody," she said quietly. "We'll need you for processing. It'll take most of tomorrow, possibly the day after." "I know." "After that," she paused, "you understand that cooperation changes the exposure significantly, but doesn't eliminate it. There will be a process." "I know what the process is." She looked at him. Something in her face that was not quite sympathy, more like the recognition one serious person extends to another when they understand the weight of what has been decided. "For what it's worth," she said, "what you built for that investigation, the documentation, the financial records, it's cleaner than anything I've been handed in 15 years of this work." He didn't answer. Lily had turned back toward him, the phone still to her ear, and she reached out and took his hand, not asking, not hesitating, just taking it the way children take things they have decided belong to them, and held it while she talked to her mother, and he stood very still because the alternative was doing something that would frighten the federal agents, and looked down at the small hand wrapped around his and felt the full weight of 10 days collide with 9 years in his chest, and did not look away from it. Outside, the waterfront went about its ordinary dark business. The port equipment ran. The water moved against the pilings. The city continued its indifferent noise. And in a gutted industrial building on the south waterfront, a man who had spent his adult life in the specific gravity of a criminal empire stood holding his daughter's hand in the aftermath of everything he had just ended and waited for whatever came next. Cho moved away to manage her team, giving him the specific professional courtesy of distance, and he was grateful for it without being able to say so. Lily finished the call and handed the phone back. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her face was dry, and she looked up at him with the expression he was beginning to recognize as specifically hers, the one that meant she had a question she was deciding whether to ask. She asked it. "Why did you help me?" she said. "You don't know me." He looked down at her. The birthmark below her left ear, the locket under her sweatshirt, the angle of her jaw that was his jaw and his father's jaw and his grandfather's jaw going back further than anyone had written down. "I know you a little," he said. "From the shop." From the shop. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "You knew my mom before," she said, "from a long time ago." "You said." "Yes." "Were you important to her?" The question was so direct and so accurate that it took him a moment to answer, and the moment itself was an answer, and she was sharp enough to know it. "Yes," he said, "and she was important to me." Lily looked at him for a long time. The federal team moved around them, efficient and purposeful, and the generator lights had been restored by someone with a practical mind, and the Westfield site was bright again and full of people doing their jobs. And in the middle of all of it, two people stood in a small patch of stillness that belonged only to them. "Nathan told me my dad died," Lily said. Her voice was careful, feeling the edges of the thing. "Before I was born." He said nothing. "Mom never really talked about him," she said. "But she kept—" Her hand came up, touched the outside of her sweatshirt where the locket sat beneath it. "She kept this." He looked at her hand pressed flat against her chest over the locket he had chosen in a jewelry shop 26 years old and full of a feeling he hadn't had the vocabulary for yet. "I know she did," he said. Lily looked at him, the frank, unguarded, completely direct look of a child who has decided she already knows the answer and is simply waiting for the adult to confirm it. He met her eyes. He did not say the words yet. Not here, not in this building, not surrounded by federal agents and the wreckage of the worst night of her life. That conversation deserved better than this. It deserved a quiet room and her mother present and all the time in the world to ask every question she had. But he held her gaze and he did not look away, and she held his, and between them something was confirmed that did not require words, and she nodded once, a small, serious, entirely composed nod, and slipped her hand back into his. They walked out of the Westfield site together into the cold waterfront air, and the city lights lay across the water, and somewhere across the city Evelyn was waiting, and the night was almost done. The drive back across the city took 23 minutes. Damien drove. Lily sat in the passenger seat with her backpack on her lap, instead of her back now, holding it against her chest like something she needed between herself and the world, and she looked out the window at the city going past and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. And he let the silence exist because it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of a person processing, and she deserved the space to do it without someone filling it with words that were really about the speaker's discomfort rather than the listener's need. At the 11-minute mark, she said, "Are we going to my mom?" "Yes." "Is Nathan there?" "Yes." She nodded, went back to the window, then, "Is Nathan in trouble?" He glanced at her. Why would Nathan be in trouble? Because he lied. She said it without particular anger, as a fact. About things. I could tell something was... There were things he wouldn't answer. When I asked about my dad, he'd always say something else and I'd end up talking about something else. And then later I'd think, wait, he didn't actually answer. She paused. I'm pretty good at noticing when people don't answer. You are, he said. Mom's worse at it than Nathan. She tries, but she does this thing with her hands when she's not telling me everything. A short pause. The sink thing. He almost said something, caught it. Nathan's not in trouble, he said instead. He made some decisions that were hard and some of them hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt, but he was trying to keep you safe. She absorbed this. Did it work? For 9 years, he said. Yes. She looked at him with her mother's eyes in his own face and said quietly, "And then you showed up." "And then I showed up." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, the shape a smile leaves when the situation doesn't quite allow the real thing yet. She turned back to the window and he drove. And the city moved past them, and somewhere ahead of them a woman was standing in a back room above a flower shop, having survived the worst 2 hours of her life and waiting for the sound of a car outside. Hale opened the back door before they reached it. He looked at Lily first, the rapid, comprehensive assessment of a man checking for damage. And whatever he found satisfied him because his shoulders dropped a fraction and he stepped back to let them in. Lily walked past him into the back room and stopped, and then Evelyn came down the stairs, and the two of them met at the bottom and held on, and Damien stood near the door and looked at the shelving along the wall and gave them the privacy of his inattention. He heard Evelyn crying. Quietly, the way she did everything, contained, not for anyone else, just the sound of a woman releasing 40 minutes of terror into her daughter's hair. He heard Lily's voice, muffled, saying something he couldn't make out, and Evelyn making a sound that was half laugh and entirely broken, and then the specific quality of silence that follows when two people have found each other and are just breathing the same air. Hale appeared at his shoulder. They stood together near the door without speaking for a moment. Outside, a car went past on the wet street, headlights sweeping briefly through the back window. "She knows," Damien said. Low, not a question. Hale was quiet for a moment. "How much?" "Enough. She's been putting it together for longer than either of you realized." He glanced at Hale. "She's sharp. She gets that from both sides," Hale said. There was something in his voice that was not quite pride and not quite grief. The complicated register of a man who has watched a child grow for 9 years, knowing he was standing in a space that didn't belong to him. Damien looked at him. At the gray jacket, the weathered face, the flat considered eyes that were something different now than when he'd first seen them 2 weeks ago across a flower shop counter. Still careful, still assessing, but with something underneath that Damien could now read as what it actually was. Exhaustion and relief, and the specific weight of a man who has been carrying a secret for 9 years and has just set it down. "She asked about you," Damien said, "in the car, whether you were in trouble." Hale's jaw moved. "I told her you made hard decisions trying to keep her safe, that some of them hurt people who didn't deserve it." Damien paused. "That's the truth, as far as I can give it." Hale looked at the floor. "I falsified a death notification," he said, "to a pregnant woman. I moved a civilian asset outside federal protocol without authorization. I maintained a deception for 9 years against the direct interests of the child I was ostensibly protecting." A pause. "I'll carry those things." "You'll carry them," Damien said, "but you also pulled her out of a burning car on a county road with a 2-month-old in the back seat and spent 9 years making sure nobody finished what they started." He looked at the man. "I'm not going to tell you the math works out clean, but I understand the math." Hale nodded once. A small motion, containing a great deal. Across the room, Evelyn and Lily had separated enough to look at each other. Evelyn holding her daughter's face in both hands, looking at her with the focused intensity of a woman conducting an inventory of something she almost lost, and Lily submitting to this with the patient tolerance of a child who understands her mother needs it, even if it's slightly embarrassing. Then Lily looked past her mother and found Damien across the room. Evelyn felt the shift in her attention and turned. The four of them occupied the back room of the flower shop in the particular quiet of people who have arrived, together and separately, at the end of something, and are standing in the space the ending has left behind, not yet sure of the shape of what comes next. Evelyn looked at Damien. Her eyes were red, and her hair had come down from whatever it had been in earlier, and there was a red mark on her forearm where she had pressed it against something while she waited. The counter edge, the stair rail, the unconscious physical self-comfort of a person in distress. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the flower shop that first afternoon, except that the shock was gone now, replaced by something more complicated and more honest. The look of a woman who has had 10 days to understand that the life she built on a false foundation is not destroyed by the truth being revealed, only clarified. "Is it over?" she said. "Moretti's in federal custody. Cho has everything. His network, his financials, the connection to the county road. It'll take months to process, but he won't be making decisions about anyone's safety from where he is." She absorbed this, nodded slowly. "My operation," he said. "I gave it to Cho. Everything. The documentation, the financial records, the structure. It's done." She looked at him. Something moved in her face, not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a person receiving information that confirmed something they were not yet sure they were allowed to hope. "What does that mean for you?" she said. "Cooperation agreement. There's a process. It'll take time, and it won't be comfortable, and at the end of it, I'll have a record and constraints and obligations." He said it evenly, without self-pity, because self-pity required the belief that he had deserved something different, and he had long since stopped believing that. "But I'll be here. That's what it means." She looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. You could have found another way, negotiated, kept more of Evelyn." He said her name the way he had said it in this room 10 days ago. Not with urgency, not with force, just with the specific weight of a man who has decided to mean what he says and say only what he means. "I know what I did and why I did it. I don't need it to be framed differently." She closed her mouth, opened it again. "Okay," she said, "just that." Lily was watching both of them with the expression of a child running calculations too sophisticated for her years, arriving at conclusions she was not yet ready to say out loud, filing them in a place she would return to when she was ready. Hale moved toward the stairs. "I'll be upstairs," he said, giving them the room. And then it was the three of them. The silence was different from all the previous silences in this building. Not tense, not loaded with things unsaid, but open, the specific openness of a space that has been cleared of obstruction and is now simply waiting to be inhabited. Lily set her backpack on the work table. She reached into the front pocket and took out a small folded piece of paper. A drawing, he realized, a child's drawing done in pencil, small figures, a building, what appeared to be flowers along the bottom edge. She unfolded it and smoothed it on the table without explanation, as if she needed her hands to be doing something. "She does that when she's thinking," Evelyn said quietly. To him. "Draws." He looked at the drawing. The figures were simple, but they had presence. A woman behind a counter, a child in front of it, and near the door, slightly separate, a man-shaped figure with its hands at its sides. She had drawn the shop. She had drawn all three of them. "When did you draw this?" he said. Lily looked at it. "After you came in the third time," she said. "I don't know, I drew what I saw." He looked at the figure near the door, slightly separate, hands at its sides. Not inside the scene, not outside it, positioned at the threshold, the specific location of someone who has not yet decided which way they're going to move. He pulled a stool from under the work table and sat down, which brought him to Lily's eye level, and she looked at him without stepping back, without the wariness he might have expected from a child who had been through the evening she'd just been through. "There are things I need to tell you," he said. "Important things. And they're going to change how you understand some things you thought you already knew." He paused. "And I think somewhere you already know what some of them are." She looked at him steadily. Her hand rested near the drawing. "But I want to ask you something first," he said. "What would you want, if you could want anything, about any of this?" She thought about it. Not long. She had already been thinking about it. He could see that. The question had been running in her for days, maybe longer, maybe since the first afternoon when a man came in out of the rain to buy lilies, and her mother went the color of chalk. "I want to know the truth," she said. "All of it. Even the bad parts." She looked at him. "I can handle bad parts." "I know you can," he said. "And I want—" She stopped. Something moving in her face that was very young and very old at the same time. The expression of a child carrying a longing she has learned not to name, because naming it has always felt like asking for something she wasn't allowed to want. "I want my mom not to be scared anymore. She's been scared my whole life, and she tries to hide it, but I can feel it. I want her not to have to feel that. Evelyn made a sound behind him. He didn't turn. And, Lily said, and then stopped for a longer moment, longer than either of the others. And when she continued, her voice was careful, the way you are careful with something fragile. I want to know who my dad was. Is. She caught the correction and looked at him, and in her eyes was the complete and total knowledge of a child who has done the math and arrived at the only answer the numbers allow, but is waiting, still for someone to say it out loud, because until someone says it out loud, it remains in the category of things that might not be real. He held her gaze, his daughter's eyes, his father's line, the locket at her throat. My name is Damien Ashcroft, he said, and I have been looking for a way to sit exactly here and say exactly this since the first day I walked into your shop and saw your face. He paused. I didn't know about you until 10 days ago, not because I chose not to, because I was told something that wasn't true, and I believed it, and the years went by, and I'm sorry for every one of them that you didn't have what you should have had. The room was completely silent. Lily looked at him for a long time. Her hand on the table, near the drawing, moved. Not toward him, not away, just a small shift of the fingers, the motion of a person reorganizing their grip on something. You're not dead, she said. No. Nathan said you were dead. I know. He was wrong to do that. He thought he was protecting you. She considered this with the serious, unsentimental fairness she brought to everything. He was protecting me, she said. Just also lying. Yes. She looked down at the drawing, at the figure near the door. Then she picked up the pencil from the table. It had been lying there with the drawing, and without a word she bent over the paper and made a small adjustment to the figure near the door, a change that took her 5 seconds, and then she put the pencil down and stepped back. He looked at the drawing. She had moved the figure. It was no longer near the door, no longer at the threshold, no longer positioned between inside and outside. She had redrawn it simply with a few added lines, placing it closer to the counter, closer to the woman and the child figure, inside the frame of the scene rather than at its edge. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. She was looking back at him with the complete open expression of a child who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. Not because the decision was easy, but because she has assessed it fully, found it sound, and moved on to the practical question of what comes next, because that is what she does, because that is who she is, and he recognized it because it was what he did, and who he was, and had always been. Okay, she said, the same word her mother had said 20 minutes ago, containing the same enormous amount. Evelyn crossed the room and put her hand on Lily's shoulder and looked at Damien over her daughter's head, and her eyes were wet, but her face was the steadiest he had seen it. Not the controlled steadiness of a woman holding herself together, but the genuine steadiness of a woman who has been carrying a weight alone for 9 years and has, in the last 10 minutes, felt it distributed. He stood up from the stool. The 3 of them stood in the back room of the flower shop, and the night outside was quiet, the sirens long gone, the waterfront done with its drama, the city settling into the ordinary register of its late hours. Nathan should come down, Lily said. Both adults looked at her. He lied, she said, practical. But he was trying, and he's been up there by himself for a while. She paused. He's probably terrible at being by himself. Evelyn made a sound that was definitely a laugh this time, broken at the edges but real. She pressed her hand over her mouth and the laugh came through anyway, and Lily looked at her with the expression of a child who has caused an effect she didn't fully predict but finds acceptable. Damien called up the stairs. Hale. Footsteps. Hale came down and stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the 3 of them in the middle of the room and then looked at Lily specifically. And Lily looked back at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding something. You lied, she said. Yes, Hale said. No decoration, no justification, just the word. You thought it would keep me safe. Yes. She looked at him for another moment. It mostly did, she said. Up until tonight. A pause. Tonight wasn't great. No, Hale said. It wasn't. She nodded once with the air of a person closing an account, not forgetting, not dismissing, closing, the way you close something that has been examined fully and can now be stored in its proper place. Okay, she said, for the third time that night. Hale sat down on the bottom step. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for a moment, and when he lifted it again, he looked like a man who has been a certain way for a very long time and is now, in the specific mercy of a child's provisional forgiveness, allowed to be a different way, and doesn't quite know yet what that looks like. They stayed in the back room for a while, not talking much, doing small practical things, Evelyn making coffee, Hale and Lily sitting at the work table while she explained the drawing to him in the particular detailed way children explain things to adults they want to include, Damien standing near the door to the front of the shop looking at the dark refrigerator cases and the hanging bundles of dried flowers and the hand-lettered price cards and all the careful ordinary apparatus of a life built from scratch in a city no one was born in. He thought about what Cho had said. The process. The months it would take. The careful legal dismantling of everything his father had built and that he had maintained and that had defined the shape of his life since he was 26 years old. He thought about what would be left on the other side of that process. The legitimate businesses, the properties that had clean histories, the quiet residual of an empire reduced to its legal minimum. Not nothing, but nothing like what it had been. He found he could look at that prospect and keep breathing. Behind him, Lily was telling Hale about a book she was reading, something about a girl who discovered an underground city, her voice carrying the specific enthusiasm of a person who has found something they want to share before the feeling diminishes. Hale was asking questions, real ones, not adult performance questions, and her answers were detailed and elaborate and occasionally corrective when his questions showed insufficient understanding of the underground city's geography. He thought about the cemetery on the east side of the city, where his father's grave had no flowers on it. He turned around. Tomorrow, he said. To the room in general, to no one specifically. They looked at him. I need to go to the cemetery. It was the reason I came into the shop the first time. He paused. I'd like to not go alone. Lily considered this. The lilies, she said. You never bought them. You left them on the counter. I left them on the counter. She looked at her mother. Something passing between them in the specific wordless register that 8 years of close quarters had developed between them. A question, an answer, a small negotiation conducted entirely in the quality of a gaze. We have lilies, Evelyn said. She moved to the refrigerator case, opened it, drew out a bundled sleeve of white stems. She held it for a moment, looking at it, and then she crossed the room and put it in his hands. Her fingers brushed his, briefly, and neither of them moved away from the contact. In the morning, she said, quietly, looking at the flowers in his hands. In the morning, he said. She raised her eyes to his, 9 years in her face, and the lines at the corners of her eyes, and the scar at her chin from a bicycle at 13, and all the rest of it. The county road and the borrowed city, and the years of waiting for a knock at the door that meant the wrong thing. All of it present, none of it gone, and underneath it something that had survived all of it, that was still there the way certain things are still there after everything that should have destroyed them, the way water finds its level regardless of what you put in its path. He held the lilies. He did not say everything he wanted to say. This was not the moment for everything. This was the moment for the morning, for the cemetery and the flowers, and the three of them standing in a place where the dead are quiet, and the living can, if they allow it, begin to understand what they are going to do with what they have been given. Lily slid off her stool and picked up her backpack and the drawing from the table, folding the drawing carefully and putting it in the front pocket, the same pocket it had come from. I'm tired, she said, with the complete unapologetic honesty of a child announcing a fact. Can we go upstairs? Yes, Evelyn said. Lily moved toward the stairs, stopped, turned back. She looked at Damien. Are you coming? She said. He looked at her. At the birthmark below her left ear, at the locket under her sweatshirt, at the face that was her mother's and his, and something entirely its own. Not tonight, he said. Tonight you sleep. I'll be here in the morning. She looked at him with the evaluating expression, checking the statement for reliability. Then she nodded once. "Okay," she said. The last okay of the night, and it was different from the others. Not provisional, not the okay of a person deciding, but the okay of a person who has decided and is done, who is satisfied with what has been established, who is ready to sleep and wake up and find out what the morning brings. She went up the stairs. Evelyn followed her, pausing at the bottom step. She looked back at him, and there was nothing performed in her expression, nothing managed for his benefit. Just her face in the low light, honest and tired and still there. "The lock on the back door," she said. "The knob sticks. You have to push in slightly while you turn." It was the most ordinary thing she could have said. It was exactly right. "I know," he said. "I've been using it for a week." Something settled in her face. "Good night, Damien." "Good night." She went up. Hale remained standing near the stair. "I'll stay on the street tonight," Hale said. "Old habit." "You don't need to." "I know." He looked at Damien. "I'll stay anyway." Damien nodded. He looked around the back room one more time. The work table, the utility sink, the shelves of wire and foam, and the careful tools of a trade built from nothing in a borrowed city. He set the lilies on the work table where they would stay until morning. He went out through the back door, pushing in slightly while turning the knob, and the lock released, and he stepped into the alley. The night was cold and clear. The rain from the beginning of all this finally gone. The sky overhead doing what the sky does in a city. Not dark exactly, never fully dark. The ambient light of millions of people going about their lives, pressing upward against the clouds and reflecting back down. A permanent twilight that you stop seeing after you've lived in it long enough. He stood in the alley for a moment. He was 34 years old, and he had inherited an empire and surrendered it. And he had found a daughter he didn't know he had. And he had a federal cooperation agreement and a process ahead of him that would be long and costly and would require from him a specific kind of patience that was different from the patience he had practiced in the life he was leaving behind. He was not afraid of it. He walked to the end of the alley and turned north toward where he'd parked, and the city went about its ordinary nighttime business around him. A couple walking a dog, a taxi running a light, the distant sound of music from somewhere above street level. The specific anonymous comfort of a city that does not care about any individual story because it is the simultaneous container of millions of them. His father's grave was on the east side, and in the morning there would be lilies, and he would not be alone. He walked through the city, and the night held him without judgment, and he let it, and the morning was not far.